All right, let's dive into one of the most, well, chaotic and fascinating periods in all of ancient Egyptian history, the 13th dynasty. This isn't a story about foreign invasion, but about how a truly mighty empire can start to come apart at the seams from the inside out. It's a huge question, right? One that we see play out over and over again in history. But for the ancient Egyptians who believed so deeply in divine order, in Ma'at, the idea of their own kingdom just fracturing, that must have been truly terrifying. And that's exactly the story we're going to get into today. So this here gives us a fantastic bird's eye view of what we're talking about. You can see the map showing a divided kingdom, a capital on the move. We're going to look at all of it, the shaky politics, the rise of local power players, and maybe most surprisingly, the incredible art that somehow survived. Think of this as our roadmap for the chaos. So where did all this instability even begin? Well, as it so often does, the trouble started right at the very top. The throne of Egypt wasn't just unstable, it basically became a revolving door. Just think about this number for a second. 30. That's right, around 30 different kings in just 150 years. On average, that's a new pharaoh every 5 years. I mean, can you imagine the constant upheaval? No one had time to really cement their power, build anything lasting, or create any real stability. It was a perfect recipe for disaster. You know, this quote just hits the nail on the head. It sums it all up so perfectly. The kingdom didn't just stumble, it fragmented. It broke apart, and it all started with that weakness at the top. And you can see here how this created a vicious cycle. The short reigns left a power vacuum. That vacuum, of course, invited rival claimants to jump in and try to grab the throne for themselves. And every single one of those power struggles just chipped away at the central authority of the pharaoh, making the next king's reign even weaker. It was just a complete downward spiral. So what's the inevitable result when you have a crisis like that at the top? Well, the kingdom itself begins to shatter. The central government just couldn't hold it all together anymore. Now, this map shows something really crucial. The capital city actually moves south to a place called Ichjatawi. And let me tell you, this was not a power move. This was a retreat. It was basically the pharaohs admitting they were losing their grip on the super wealthy and important Nile Delta up in the north. And you know who loves a power vacuum? Ambitious local leaders. These guys, regional governors, local warlords, they stopped waiting for orders from the pharaoh. They started acting like kings in their own right, with their own armies and their own little territories. This quote just perfectly captures the new reality. Egypt wasn't one unified kingdom anymore. It was this patchwork of competing little domains. You had lots of people calling themselves king, but almost no one had the power to actually unite the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt under one crown again. Okay, so it's really easy to hear all this and think, wow, what a total dark age, a complete collapse of civilization. But, and this is a huge but, the reality is so much more interesting. Because in the middle of all that political chaos, something incredible managed to endure. Exactly, it really wasn't. Because even with all the fragmentation and the fighting, Egyptian culture proved to be unbelievably resilient. In fact, some of the art that comes out of this period is just stunning, a real continuation of the kingdom's glory days. I mean, just look at the statuette of Pharaoh Hor. It's a perfect example. Even with kings coming and going, the royal workshops were clearly still operating at an incredibly high level. This tells you that while the kings might have been temporary, the institutions, the traditions of Egyptian art and craftsmanship, they were still going strong. And you see this resilience in the small things too. These little scarab seals, they're not just jewelry. They were basically the tools of government bureaucracy, stamped with the king's name. The fact that they were still being made with such care shows that the machinery of the state and the symbolic power of being king hadn't totally vanished. And check out the detail on this little faience sphinx. Now, faience is this glazed ceramic stuff that is notoriously difficult to work with. To make something this beautiful and complex, you needed skilled artists and well-funded workshops. It's solid proof that high culture was very much alive, even as the political world was falling apart. This quote just sums up this whole surprising chapter, doesn't it? The physical kingdom was breaking, but the idea of the kingdom, its art, its identity, the names of its rulers, that managed to ride out the storm. So, after a century and a half of this turbulence, how did it all finally end? And what did it really leave behind? Well, this timeline helps put that final chapter in perspective. The dynasty kicked off around 1805 BCE. It had a few moments of real stability in the middle, with some pretty powerful kings, but eventually it just kind of fizzled out around 1650 BCE. And its end officially kicked off what historians now call the Second Intermediate Period, an era that was defined by a divided Egypt. And that brings us right back to our big question, doesn't it? The 13th dynasty, it lost its power, its unity, its borders on the map. But as we've seen, its culture, its art, its traditions, they survived. It really makes you wonder, what's the true legacy of any great civilization? Is it the armies and the territory? Or is it the ideas and the beauty that it leaves for the